I'm here today with Professor Joseph Westphal, who is joining me from his home in a suburb of Philadelphia. Professor Westphal is a senior fellow and also the Chang Term Professor at the Lauder Institute of the University of Pennsylvania. He has a very long career. He has served under 5 presidents: Carter, Reagan, Clinton, George W. Bush, and Obama. Prior to serving in public service, he was a chancellor of the University of Maine and the provost at the New School in New York City. Then he served at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and he was named Undersecretary of the U.S. Army, and after that, Ambassador to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Professor Westphal, I would like to begin by asking you the following question. I'm sure you have dealt with many crises during your long career, both in the universities and in the public sector. What have you learned about how we should be coping with a crisis?
I think the most important thing that anyone needs to have in coping with any crisis, regardless of where you are in the structure of an organization or an agency or a university or whatever, is to have a strategy that you can follow, to have an understanding of a process. So when you're fighting, whether it's a virus, biological infection of natural causes like this one, or a war, or a global situation that's arisen, all of us need to know what the strategy is, need to know what the path forward is, and what the structure is to follow that structure. In learning that, in understanding that, it's always helped me to be able to deal with all of the crises in a prudent, factual, and comprehensive fashion.
Thank you. And more specifically, in which ways do you think today the U.S. Army, or more broadly the U.S. military, could help in coping with the pandemic?
Yeah, I think first of all, back to the first point that I made, I don't think any organization in the world is better at understanding and following a strategy and operationalizing a strategy than the United States military. And because we are a joint force, meaning that the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard are all interconnected in any effort that we have across all kinds of situations. Having that strategy, being able to operationalize that strategy and lean on each other to help support it is what makes us the most successful country in the world in terms of dealing with these large and complex issues. The question is the strategy. That strategy, however, is defined and led in our country generally by the president, by the White House and his staff, who then must initiate the efforts for us to follow the strategy and to move forward and operationalize.
So specifically, which kinds of assets can the U.S. military offer now to address all of the various needs? Are we talking about field hospitals? Are we talking about logistics? What specifically is it that they can do?
Well, there's an abundance of resources that the military has. Obviously, they are in place primarily, but not exclusively, primarily to defend the homeland militarily, right? So the military gets a little nervous when these assets and these resources and these capabilities are requested or sometimes required to be used in a non-military function, because the fear is, will we be prepared should there be an attack, should be a threat on the homeland, if we're deviating these resources to something else? But to get to the point of your question is, it's an abundance of resources. You mentioned military hospitals. There's a significant number of military hospitals around the country. Some of them are incredibly large and important. For example, in Washington, you have the Walter Reed Medical Center, which is the sort of the core and the center of all the medical resources of the military. And it conducts a significant amount of research on infectious diseases and vaccines, and has resulted in a lot of discoveries by the military of scientific advancements in these areas. So you have the research component there. You have hospitals with great capability. Now, because the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq is over, the war in Afghanistan is almost done, and we don't have the number of casualties coming in that we had when I was there as undersecretary, those resources are much more available. The threat would have been, if this had happened, 10 years ago, it would have been a challenge to serve our military needs as well as our civilian needs. In addition to the medical fact, you have a significant entity within the military and all the forces that trains everything from nurses to doctors to combat medics. All of those people are a great resource. And they are also within the National Guard capability. So the military serves both from a personnel and a structural standpoint in a great way, and a scientific standpoint as well. Then you have all the other resources, ships, vehicles, airplanes, anything that you need to move, to transport, to create. You have the Army Corps of Engineers, you have the Army Seabees. In other words, you have components within the military that are designed to build infrastructure, to construct hospitals, to construct medical facilities when needed. And we have, of course, all of the resources to evacuate people, to move people out.
Yeah, I've read in the media that the U.S. military played a very important role during the Ebola crisis, specifically in Africa.
Yes.
Is this true, that without the U.S. military, perhaps that crisis would have been much worse?
I think so. President Obama immediately decided to basically confront the crises where it was originating, which was in West Africa, rather than wait for it to eventually find its way to our shores and to our people. And the way to do that was to send a significant number of military personnel, trained, capable, well-equipped, to build the facilities that would protect hospital medical personnel, the equipment that they could bring that would protect them as well, all of the various suits that you need to keep the viruses from attacking all the medical personnel. So we sent thousands of soldiers there. I was ambassador in Saudi Arabia when this was going on, and so I was working also with our military to make sure that we were supporting the efforts of moving the force to West Africa. It was a great job, and we contained it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
The vaccines for Ebola were partly discovered by the Army and the Navy at Walter Reed.
So let me ask you one last question. You have a wealth of experience. What do you think is the most important piece of advice that you would give to policymakers right now in Washington who are scrambling to come up with a set of measures to contain this pandemic?
Yeah, I have something here that will show a show and tell here. I don't know if you can read this. Do you read that?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, so this is a document called the National Biodefense Strategy for 2018. So this was actually done during this administration. And what it does is there's a national military strategy that the Department of Defense puts together and the president approves. And then this is a part of that. It's a very important part because this is about protecting the homeland. The National Security Staff strategy is about protecting our country. This is about protecting our country from biological threats that come either from the natural environment or are potentially threats that are a result of an attack by bad actors. This strategy lays out a clear passage and a clear process. It puts the White House on top. It then puts the Department of Health and Human Services, the secretary of that, to be in charge of something like the coronavirus outbreak. And then below him are a series of other cabinet secretaries like State, Defense, and everybody else, the CDC, and so on. And in responding to that, through the Secretary of Defense, is the military. All of the military, not just part of the military. And all of that is supposed to follow a clear path. So sometimes what best happens is the White House, that is the people at the very top, have to get out of the way and let this process work. And let the people who are supposed to run this strategic operational process do it. Politics sometimes gets in the way of that. And that I think is happening, or has been happening here, until finally the thing got so dangerous to our national security that the White House is having to let go a little bit.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Westphal, for sharing your thoughts with us today. And please stay healthy.
Thank you. You too.